Let's talk about the business of the day as it relates to theater with your hosts, Darnelle Radford and Mitch Weiss. This is The Business of Theater, a working title. Mitch, I know we're looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater. It happens.
Well, it may be the truth that it happens, but you're right. It's just too short.
Yeah.
Right?
I even tried S asterisk
I know.
IT happens. It just wouldn't work. Yeah. So welcome to The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnelle Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And let's get down to business. So last night was the Oscars.
And if they had stopped after we had the wicked, phenomenal opening
number, yeah.
We could have
opening medley.
I was ready to go home. At that point, and it doesn't mean there aren't other enjoyable moments.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, if now they come out and all they do is go through all the awards and give out one after the other, I'm satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
I saw those two women kick butt on stage. What more do I need?
Yeah,
right?
But whenever I see a good performance at an award show, I always end it with saying, "That's our budget. Good night."
Yeah, that's it. Still the best opening number ever.
Oh my God, that was wonderful. We're talking about Neil Patrick Harris.
Opening of the Tonys.
Yeah, I think this number was called Bigger.
Bigger.
Yeah, Bigger. Yeah, it was very good. Very good.
It was just mouths were open, and
speaking of Wicked and Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande's wonderful performance, leading off the Oscars, Cynthia Erivo is going to host the Tony Awards.
Yes, she is.
It's going to be awesome. We'll see that opening number.
I'd like to just say this is her year, except for the fact I'm exhausted for her.
Yeah.
She is showing up everywhere. Mm-hmm. And, recently I saw her at Lincoln Center did a concert version of Little Night Music, Stephen Sondheim's wonderful piece.
Mm-hmm.
And she did The Miller's Son, which is not particularly appropriate for her. And everyone on cast, I knew some of the actors in the concert, they all said they were under-rehearsed, they had almost no time, and that's a very difficult song. She did a fine job. It wasn't the best job she could have done. And I'm going, well, but if this is the worst she ever does, damn, I'll see her anywhere.
Yeah.
And by the way, and I have to say this, the reason Ariana and Cynthia kicked butt is because they did this as if they belonged to the world of theater. Mm-hmm. They were performing. The cameras knew they were performing. The orchestra knew they were performing. This wasn't, and now we do a little tap dance number to shut up the Oscar audience. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, the Oscars have never had good musical numbers. Ever. And they lived up to that last night, except for Cynthia and Ariana.
And you think they should step it up? Conan O'Brien, the host for the evening, pointed out that 100 million people are watching this.
Mm-hmm. No,
worldwide.
A billion. He said a billion.
He said a billion?
He said a billion.
But the world is watching, and so the Oscars get way more traction out of all the award shows. And so this one should be more of a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you were a theater geek, you probably watched the Oscars for the opening number and then had a hard time sitting through the rest to get to the very end, which, I wouldn't say felt like a disappointment. It was kind of like, okay, there's another chance for Cynthia Erivo to get an EGOT.
Yeah.
But it wasn't last night, so EGOT not. Not quite. But there were other things we were talking about, like, Defying Gravity as a song can't be eligible for an Oscar because it's written. It's
Right.
It already exists. And but there's supposed to be an original song in Wicked for Good that would give Cynthia an opportunity. So we'll see. Can't wait to see that.
Yeah, it's hard. The real winner, though, out of all of this,
yes,
is the Broadway show Wicked.
Yeah.
It has topped Hamilton. It has topped The Lion King in the past few weeks as far as income.
Mm-hmm.
So I should not, and the show's over 20 years old. So not that it wasn't doing great money anyway, but, it's different sizes of different theaters and different prices. Certain shows hover around that between $2 and $3 million point per week. And Wicked has just been taking them all by storm.
Yeah. I will say the movie did take home 2 Oscar awards, one for production design and one for costume design, which they were both stunning and I think well deserved.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But, again, there isn't a category. The Golden Globes, I think, put a new category in, what do they call it? Popular movies?
Oh, yeah, it's something like greatest cinematic achievement or something like that.
It has to do with the fact that blockbusters do not get nominated as art.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they said, well, we can have other categories. And I think that's a smart idea. There are sometimes you just watch all the money on the screen or in theater, all the money on stage, and you go, they did, wow, they made the cost of my ticket look like it was there. Right?
Yeah.
And then they did a wonderful design. There's no question.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you compare Dune 2 with Wicked? I mean, that's where I've always had trouble with these shows.
Yeah, I just feel like as much as we love musicals, we're not a lot of people.
No, we're not.
And that's what I think. It's just that. It's like, Bollywood is such a hit in India.
India. Yeah.
It's such a hit in India, but then it's barely gaining traction here. And when it shows up, we're just like, oh, Bollywood. Oh, that was great. What a great performance. Like, whenever we see the performance in the moment, it is a wonderful performance, but it's not enough to be like, we need more Bollywood. Like, and then when you get into musicals, we have a specific expectation for a musical. And I think that's what a lot of people are not drawn to, because like a traditional musical, is a celebrated canon classic, is a theater goer's dream, a theater lover's dream.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like last night at the Oscars, Emilia Perez is a musical that does not feel like any musical we see on Broadway, but all of the elements of it being musical were very much there. And that movie, I don't know if it got a lot of traction or got as much traction. It had critical acclaim and it had a lot of scandal, but I don't know too many people that I came across and mentioned Emilia Perez who actually saw it and had a response.
Well, let's talk about Anora.
Mm-hmm. Anora, yeah. I saw the preview of Anora because I was in a Landmark theater and I saw it saying like, okay, we'll keep an eye out for that, but we didn't go to the theater to see it.
I have yet to have anybody I know tell me forget about see it. They didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
And it's great that an independent film can do that. I have no problems with that.
Yeah.
But there is a level of, why did I miss this if it's really that special that it can beat out all these other movies?
Well, it's something like these award shows are for the industry. They're not really for the fans.
Right.
And that's why a foreign film wins the Oscar, and it's a big deal in the room, but everybody's like, huh, what? Like animated shorts, and the animation and the shorts, like often they're the ones everybody doesn't get to see because, especially with the shorts are all over the world.
Right.
And they're beautiful and stunning wherever they were fortunate enough to play in New York and LA. But then everywhere else, like Kansas didn't get, any of the short film nominees. And like we didn't realize, actually, they weren't even available to us until like February 7th.
Right.
When they showed up in most art house theaters. But like everybody is not a member of an art house theater, or, the art house theaters can only thrive in like major cities. And, like Philadelphia has a few, but not like New York has.
Now let's talk about one. I think it was the director of Honora. If I got this wrong, I apologize.
Is that Keith Baker?
Yeah, who started commenting about we have to go to the real movie theaters. We can't just sit at home and watch it. Was that him?
I'm sorry, Sean Baker. Keith Baker is someone notable as well, but Sean Baker. Okay. Sean Baker was the director.
Was he the one who kind of chastised us? If you want to save movies, you got to go to the theater. Well,
you gotta see it
here's
live.
my immediate answer, and of course this leads us back to theater, is, well, if you want me to, instead of watching it on Netflix or Hulu or on at home on a DVD, if they still exist, then you have to drop the price of popcorn. You have to drop the price of going to the theater and being there with people who are not going to be stopped from talking during the movie, who are not going to get up and walk in front of you and talk to their neighbors while it's going on. There's got to be, certainly in the Broadway theater, we pay attention. It is something we understand. That doesn't mean there aren't now and then somebody who interrupts with a phone that they didn't turn off. But mostly it's price. And I'm going, if I can sit at home and on my television watch something, even though I much prefer to see a big screen, then you've got to tell me you're not going to keep raising the prices. And Broadway, I have the same argument. I am in, and you and I are in the industry. There are at least a dozen new musicals opening on Broadway that I want to see. I will not be able to see them. I am not that rich.
Yeah.
And I may be wrong, but I will not sit in the last row anymore at my age. Doesn't mean I don't need the best orchestra seat. This is not about that. But I need to be able to see and hear clearly and be able to see the faces. And when I was a kid, I'm willing to sit in the last row. But the last row cost $80. $80 in the last row of a Broadway theater. Somebody has lost their way. And I don't know what the answer is. If I did, well, I have no control.
It's the owners of the house. I mean, they're so, it's so expensive to exist in a Broadway house that they have to stay ahead of it. And I imagine that the mindset, I'm not agreeing with the pricing, but I imagine the mindset is like, we can't just break even. A nonprofit has a little bit of flexibility because their goal isn't necessarily to turn an obnoxious profit. They have to account for every bit of money they bring in and what they're going to do with it. But they are for profit. And so they are thinking like, oh my God, we made 1.5 million last week. Let's do it again.
Well, let's add to it. I will tell the story without mentioning names. I was on a phone call where Broadway theater owners tried to price fix a long-running show that I was working on. And I was on the phone with the producer, the general manager, and I was the company manager. And they didn't know I was on the phone. I was told to be on there. And I heard the theater owner say, you either raise your prices to match the two other shows down the block, or we're going to shut you down and kick you out of our theater, which of course they can't do.
Yeah.
And my producer said, then kick me out. And for 6 months, he held ground saying, we don't need the money. We're doing fine. And there was no reason that our show expenses hadn't gone up.
Yeah.
But they needed to make the theater owners take a percentage of the box office. And they wanted to have that percentage. But 6 months later, we did raise the price.
Yeah, but you at least held out as long as you could.
Right. But this goes on, and there's no way. I mean, how do you take this to court? There's no evidence. In those days, we weren't recording the conversation. Right. And these are people, the producer and the theater owners are friends. They know each other. It's a one-to-one. It's like you and I talking.
And there's it's a point where you actually realize, yes, you are running this show, but you're not in full control.
Thank you. Exactly.
And it's hard for many people to even accept that we may not be in full control of anything, really.
Yeah, it's very true. It also comes down to, I know on set designs, you go in there and someone has this great idea. We're going to have all these moving parts, and the elephant and the Lion King is going to come in on the Titanic, which comes up from understage and then drops onto the audience with a giant chandelier crashing down from Phantom in the middle of it. And then the bill comes in. And it's a lot more than anyone thought. What do you do then? You're not in control.
Yeah.
What I'll call a worthy producer, I don't want to say good or bad, but a worthy producer would say, here's the budget I must stick to. We will design this to fit the budget. Do the best we can. Because it's still about the play or the musical that we're putting on. And yes, we want it to look great. How do we do that? That doesn't seem to happen much anymore, considering I just heard the latest musical to open on Broadway cost $34 million. That is not, no wonder you have to charge a fortune. It's not like it's a movie that you can send around the world and in one weekend take in $500 million. You have a limited number of seats. You have 8 performances a week, and that's it. So you can only spend what you've got coming in, right? You can't say, oh, now we're going to send it to China, and that's where we'll make the rest of the money. No, that doesn't happen that way. So I don't know what the answer is. I do know plenty of people are talking about it right now.
Oh, was that Death Becomes Her?
I know that's over 30 million. I don't know if the 34 million is Death. I think it could be. There are a couple of shows in that category that are between 30 and 36 million, I think, that are opening this spring. We got Betty Boop coming in. We've got, Redwood I don't think is that expensive. But it doesn't matter if it's more expensive than it ought to be. That's the other problem. Just kind of, with some wonderful shows coming in. Very exciting. I don't know which ones will be the hits. Be nice to be able to predict, but there are too many of them. Once again, after the Tony Awards, we will watch a whole bunch of shows go away.
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose.
I was saying how it's just becoming increasingly hard to predict, patterns. Like it's, you can't really set your watch to this now. Like, I always say that I am an odd bird, but I feel like I'm actively not trying to let the theater know that I'm coming. You know, it's like, first of all, I'm not going to do your work for you, but at the same time, you know, I feel like everybody's thinking that too, not because they're trying to spite the organization, but they're thinking like, you know, everybody, you know, our listeners, I'm pretty sure you have a friend that reached out to you and said, hey, you got any plans? Let's do something. But they've said that to like 6 different people, and they're trying to figure out whose plan is the better plan. And they might get into this whole conversation with you making plans for Friday, but then other plans end up being better plans, and then they cancel on you. And that's kind of the mindset. Everybody's just trying to get the best bang for their buck. And I also think that the prices keep going up on everything, which is why people are thinking like that. You know, I talked about before the pandemic, it felt like it was just sort of a given that we would be in a theater multiple nights a week, you know, because it wasn't like we weren't putting ourselves out to do it. And it was easy for us to engage with the theater. But now prices are going up. COVID put a strain on everyone in terms of like the kind of preparation they had to do just to go sit next to a stranger. And, you know, as if we were all tongue kissing before, you know, and now we're not allowed, no more tongue kissing in the theater. We really need to stop that. Everybody and their strangers, you know, it's, and so that kind of gave everybody fatigue. And then they just realized, I don't honestly think that live theater and live entertainment are being beat out by streaming channels. Like,
no, I don't agree with that.
That stuff is on demand. People can figure out how to block that. You know, there are a lot of things in the streaming platforms that allow you to queue up your favorites, you know, and you can curate your own night. I got 2 hours. I'm going to watch all these 30 minutes and then I'm going to bed, you know. But it's not like, oh no, I'm not going anywhere on Saturday because I'm trying to binge watch, you know, all of Game of Thrones.
Well, then every time an industry uses the line they're being threatened, I just throw it out the window. It's you know, because when radio thought they were going to die because of television, and all of a sudden, no, each medium has its own life, and there are people. The thing that I argue about theater is those of us who have experienced being in a room with other living people and sharing an experience with live performances, we feel that. It's not just understanding it. We feel it. And as you said, theater is for theater fans. It is not for the general public. They don't tend to want to go. They don't have the experience to give it a try. They don't have the desire to give it a try if they haven't grown up with it.
And as much as we claim it's not necessary, it really is. You know, there's a reason why we always ask, is there something I need to know ahead of time before I walk in here? You know, like if a piece is paying homage to something or has sort of a reference that's tied to, oh, you had to have been there. And you might be lost if you don't have this. It's kind of like if you go into a Marvel movie and you miss the 3 series that they had on Disney Plus. It's like you're going to be completely lost. But that's not it. It's that we're having an elevated conversation in the theater.
Yes.
And we don't realize that elevated conversation is not accessible to everyone. You know, if you work for a local government, they spend a lot of time dumbing down their message. Whereas in theater, we spend a lot of time inflating our message. And then, you know, we're limiting the audience who can actually process our message and engage in our conversation.
Oh, I don't know that I agree totally. I get what you're saying. I think I do.
Maybe not on Broadway because they are picking they're just regurgitating a lot of things and just repackaging something that's more accessible. But like you said, you know, listeners, Mitch is privy to a lot of insider conversation that we can't link and reference, but in some of the conversations that we were talking about as we were preparing for this conversation, is that there is a conversation about like, the percentage of work that's being produced on stages is sort of a rehashing or sort of an adaptation of something that already exists. And
right, there was and you and I discussed this because there's no evidence that these statistics are true. So I don't want to particularly use them. But in general, the point was that more than half, certainly, of successful musicals are adaptations from other media, whether they're books, movies, television shows, whatever. Of course, it's extreme. You look at West Side Story, even though it's based loosely on Romeo and Juliet, it's not Romeo and Juliet. And I would argue that doesn't make it an adaptation. It's inspired by. There's a difference. If you look at My Fair Lady, that is not Pygmalion. It is inspired by Pygmalion. I don't call My Fair Lady an adaptation. So I think some of these statistics are not true. However, the purely original shows, I mean, to me, I look at Rent and I think that's a purely original show. It's not. It's inspired by La Boheme.
Yeah.
Right? So again, somebody else calls it an adaptation. I don't know where we draw the line on, Wicked, they're books. So, but they took more than one book and they put them together and they created their own original concept of it. But I guess that's an adaptation. It's like I keep looking for, well, of course, what do we really think comes out of the blue and never existed before, right?
Yeah.
Musical theater in general started as a review. Ziegfeld did reviews. There were no plots. Then all of a sudden there was Showboat, which was a drastic change. And all of a sudden it had a plot and characters. And then, of course, Oklahoma added dance, which was going to explain part of the story. And that had never been done before. All of these changes, it's the medium that is original. And everything else, you cannot just take the script of a movie or the plot of a book and plop it on a stage and say, now it works. It doesn't. Therefore, this idea of they're all adaptations to me it's not worthy of a discussion.
And speaking of that, this is what always gets to me when somebody sees a show that has been adapted for the small screen in, whether it be a musical or, something that existed in another space. They always go, oh, well, the other one was so much better, or they left so much out. And it's just like, it's an adaptation. Like, the thing is, this director, this production team decided to focus on this particular element of that story we all know and love. And so, yes, their lens is turned in a different direction, because otherwise they would have been just producing the same show that already exists. And the medium doesn't allow for many things. Like, when we see a movie musical, like, I know there's people who don't like those movie musicals, but I feel like the spectacle of those dance sequences is so much bigger in a movie musical, because they can be,
Right.
It's like, where'd you get all these dancers come running down the street and,
I keep thinking of in the Heights, having seen it on Broadway twice, and then I look at the movie, I said, they literally have the entire Heights there. They have the entire population in the movie, and on stage there are 10 people. It's like, and we're supposed to believe we're in Washington Heights. It's like, in the theater, part of this show when it's live is your imagination. You take what's on there and you quadruple it. Whatever you're looking at, you imagine it's more than what's there.
I would love to do the commentary for those and say, like, okay, so was there like an email that went out? There were a bunch of flyers on phone poles, like, come to this community center on Thursday at 6 to learn the choreography for this dance sequence. And you're like, because everybody learned it. I mean, they could have promoted this like a flash mob, and then everybody got involved, and they're like, you're all going to be in the movie.
Except that they were all professional dancers, and you could tell.
Yeah.
That's what was very cool about it. And anyway, maybe our listeners are wondering what it happens that we said at the beginning, how we bring that back to what we're talking about. Maybe they don't care.
Sure.
I wanted to bring up.
You guys are good. You just going with it.
They're just if they're still listening to us,
they're like they're either doing laundry or washing dishes. Either way, thank you.
It could be they're in the car. It could be in the subway with their earpieces in.
Could be on a bike right now, going through an intersection. Thank you.
We appreciate it. We really don't even know who you are, and you know what? We're okay with it.
But we love you, darlings. All of you.
We're not going to do any research, no market research. Don't really care. That's what we do for theater, not for this.
Yeah, this will resonate with who it resonates with, and we're just happy to put the conversation out in the space.
Let's talk about It Happens. I'm going to start with, so you put on a Broadway show, and everything's going really well. And then you find out someone backstage on the payphone gets a call, and it's a threat that there's a bomb in the theater. So it happens. You immediately stop the show. You have the stage managers make an announcement. Everyone calmly follow the ushers out of the theater. When you hit the street, please go down the street to your right. So you're not in front of the theater. The police will be here shortly. 20 minutes later, after they find out there is no bomb in the theater, everyone, without having to go past the ticket takers, is readmitted into the theater, and probably the second actors just sneak in with him. And they sit down, and you pick up just a little before you left off. Mm-hmm. And you finish the show 20 minutes late, which in some cases could be overtime for stagehands, whatever. You can't budget for this. You can't figure it out. This was, by the way, the 1980s. This is for real. I think every theater on Broadway within a 1-year period got a bomb threat. And so we were all trained on how to do that. Then we talk about, you're doing a reading of a new play. You have 6 people in it, and you have 5 days to do it. You have a limit of 29 hours to rehearse according to equity, and everyone's excited, and you're not doing anything particularly difficult with it. And 1 hour before the first rehearsal, the leading actor calls in sick. Not only is he sick, he's got COVID. He'll be gone for the entire week. It's 1 hour before the first rehearsal. And what do you do? And by the way, let's talk about in New York, it's not like you have a lot of free space that you're rehearsing in somebody's living room.
Yeah.
You've rented rehearsal space. You've rented a theater to perform in it. All of that have limits as to when you can cancel. But you're not sure you have to cancel. Maybe you can rehearse with the other 5, and this person's going to be well enough that they can come in and do the reading later on. But you can't know that. Nor can you find someone necessarily by the next day to take over the leading role. Okay, that's number 2. You have any It Happens to add to this?
Well, this is similar to a past episode we had. It wasn't It Happens, but it was all these scenarios that happened in the theater. We talked about when one of you're producing a 2-hander, and at the at the first preview, one of your actors gets COVID, and the director has to go on, and then as soon as they are revived from COVID, they return to the show, and the second actor gets COVID. And so And so it all happens again. And, you're hoping that there's enough time in between their last show and your next show to just minimize the amount of returns or reshuffling of reservations you have to do.
And these are paid audiences. The other thing which just happened recently, Audra McDonald and Gypsy.
Yeah.
They shut down the show. They didn't say it was COVID. They said there was an illness in the cast. I assume she was one of them because someone in the chorus
is not shutting down the show for a swing.
Right. Thank you. So we
love swings.
But they may not have had the understudies ready to go on. And when people are spending $300 and up a ticket, you say either everybody's there or at least the right people are there. So, but that means that if you do the math, let's just be conservative. Let's say they lost $250,000 in ticket sales in one performance. And of course, that show was shut down for two at that time. That's $500,000. How do you budget? How do the people behind the scenes, who do you pay? Do you pay everybody else has to get paid?
Well, it's a hope that you have a contingency.
Well, but it's still about which of them don't you have to pay?
Oh, true.
Right.
Yeah.
So the managers are sitting there going, all I know is my investors and my producer want to pay only the ones we have to pay. Although every now and then you get somebody who's nice and they just say, just pay everyone and shut them up. That's the other way to go. But that leads me to a story. I cannot prove this one. Okay, so I am saying this. I'm not going to say tongue-in-cheek. I tried to find the evidence of this story about understudies.
We should start a segment, call it the "This May or May Not Be True" story moment, story block.
But I will tell you, there are two things I was told by a now deceased, very famous producer named Kermit Bloomgarden, who produced all the original Lillian Hellman plays. He produced The Miracle Worker. This is not somebody he was the top of his game. He produced Equus. That was his last show. The man has a quality in his resume and his taste. I was working for him, and he gave me two pieces of information, one of which I was able to validate, and the other I could not. After he died, I wish he was around. I went to Equity, to some of the top people I know there. I said, I was told that in the 1930s, for a 15-year period, this was before the unions had negotiated to have understudies on every show. So we're in a period of time where Broadway theater had no required understudies. That means if you're doing Hamlet and your leading actor gets sick, you have two options. And this is what I was told. I got to say it again. I was told this. I have no evidence. And by the way, no one at Equity had a history. They couldn't find any history before the 1960s. So nobody there was writing it down. Okay, which is a shame. But I did try to get the evidence. So what they did is Equity kept an understudy list of its own in which actors got to sign on to. So Hamlet gets sick. The producer can shut the show down that night and just send everyone home. Or they can call up Equity and say, I need an understudy. The first person on the list, they slide up. It's a moving list. Whether they're 27, whether they're 87, that person is sent to the theater with a script in hand, and the stage managers walk them through the play while they're reading the script to get so that the rest of the play can happen. Now, obviously, I'm going to say if it's Hamlet, they're going to shut the show down. But if it's somebody who has a smaller role in a play, they might actually say, okay, we have the waiter. So that can be done without a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
Right? But that was not for a few years. That was for 15 years, at the end of which the equity negotiated and said, producers, are you out of your mind? You should have someone ready to go on who knows the part. And the producers went, well, that's doubling my employee list. How are we going to afford that? And that was over a period of time to negotiate.
And then the next question would be, how do you afford returning all these tickets?
Right. And that, of course, was the union's argument. So that, to me, is a fascinating little thing. Of course, in regional theater, they often just close the show that night.
Yeah.
Right? So the other story, just for the heck of it, this was with evidence. Prior to somewhere in the mid-1950s, there was no such thing as a director of a play on Broadway.
Huh.
That it was, he showed me the programs from shows he had produced, and instead of director, it says staged by. So this is how he explained it to me. This is Kermit Bloomgarden. Mm-hmm. That if you have the Barrymores on stage acting in a living room comedy, drawing room comedy, you are not going to tell them how to act. Mm. They direct themselves. What you are there for is if the male and the female go in the same upstage direction of the couch and bump into each other, they're going to go, huh? And so the person who's hired to stage it goes, why don't the male go downstage of the couch, and that way we don't have a problem. That's all they did. So it was a small thing called staged by. That wasn't for musicals. This is for straight plays. So that he was able to show me in the programs. If you go looking at Lincoln Center Performing Arts Library and look at some old programs of plays, you will see the word director does not exist. So it's kind of irrelevant to what we were saying, but I thought it was a nice little tidbit to throw in there.
No, I think it's great. It's also, it's funny because there are some directors that are like, like I forget the term, like it's always like 90% of this is casting, It's like you bring them together and you sort of let them go. And that's kind of true. There's a lot of directors who are celebrated for how they allow the room to sort of figure it out. And then they are just the guiding posts who sort of bring it all together. But then there are some that are like, this is exactly how I want it, this exact way. There's no straying from this, like anything. It's, I think it also does make sense too, because the actor has to be comfortable in how they're processing this. And we've just learned now that there are other conduits that can help you channel your best, performance.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how they were left to their own devices, because there are some situations you get into and you wish the director would leave you alone.
Right.
And then others where you're like, where was the director?
I would guess that a lot of what changed it was the complexity of sets. Mm-hmm. So that the staging was, well, wait a minute, we're bringing a train on stage. You can't be standing there. Therefore, I have to have the concept of to tell you, make sure you are over here at that moment. And then you start going, well, while you're over there, you really should be throwing the line across the room rather than whispering it. So now the director starts getting into interpretation. And then you get complex shows like Equus, where, you have, at what moment are we in the psychiatrist's brain? At what moment are we in the kid's brain? And how do the horses move? And all of that, you're not going to tell an actor, use your own devices and become a horse when I'm sticking a puppet on top of you.
Yeah.
Right. So it starts to change.
Good luck. And the puppet maker is gone. They're not here today. Yeah. And so we just realized that this can be the best it can be if it has more support. And so we give more support. And it is so interesting that every producer understands the value of that support, but is also trying to cut corners at every turn.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting what a contradiction it is, because we get hung up by how much everything costs. And I know sometimes it's limiting. Like, I just don't have the money to put 2 more people on this show. And, and then the thought is like, what if I double up on this person? Or what if I double cast, like somebody who's only at the top of the show and then comes in later.
On the other hand, and this is where you get the talent of a producer. Mm-hmm. And this is an extreme case. When A Chorus Line became the longest running show in Broadway history, which was 1983, it was called performance number 3389. Michael Bennett, the show's creator, went to Joseph Papp, the producer, and said, I have an idea for a marketing idea that could help the show run another 10 years. Okay. The problem is it's going to cost the entire same amount that it costs to open the show on Broadway. And it's going to be one performance. I'm going to bring in 430 actors who have performed in A Chorus Line around the world. We're going to restage the entire show and have all 430 of them on stage at the same time for one performance. And invite the press and invite celebrities, and let's see what happens. And now you're going, excuse me, the show may be doing well, but that's a lot of money for one show. And the producer said, do it. It's going to work. I'm going to back it. And he put all the money into it. And it ran another 12 years. Doesn't mean the show wouldn't have run some of it, but it was probably the most exciting performance of anything I've ever seen on Broadway.
Yeah.
And it was so exciting to work on. So at some point you go, when does the money pay off? And if adding 2 people, when you know you don't really have the money, but if that makes the difference, it's a really hard choice. This is where you want your producer to be as talented as your director and your cast.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very interesting place to be.
Yeah, and you have to have some courage too, and it's tough because there's a lot of uncertainty in producing theater today, and so it's hard, and it's absolutely justified that maybe you are a risk taker, and by choosing the play, but in terms of like, I don't want to make this choice, and it's going to be hard for the rest of the season, to have, for us to function. And I also don't want to jump, if you have the opportunity to make a change or add something to an existing season after your budget's already been finalized and everything is kind of laid out, but somebody comes in and maybe there's a little bit of cash that goes with it, but they want to drop it right in. It has to happen now. And you're like, I don't know. It's going to be the best choice for me. Yeah. It is interesting how all of that works. And I've said before, I was like, sometimes the ignorance is bliss. When you're starting out in this business, the stuff you don't know actually it's sort of a blessing that you don't know these things. But once you figure them out and you're aware of them, it's just like the car is running. And so you just hop in and you just go like, we're driving wherever we're going. I'm on for the ride. But like, if you have the opportunity to plan to get in this car, now you'll throw all kinds of what ifs into the air, and it's going to make it harder for you to just move forward. And I do think a lot of people are a lot of people are experiencing that now.
Well, we're in a very different place. Every analysis of the post-COVID era in theater, even those theaters that are starting to get back to quote unquote some version of normal, they're still way under financed than they were prior to COVID.
Yeah.
And it's means that you now not only need a lot of courage, you need a lot of creative inspiration. You need to be, thinking about things that we didn't necessarily have to think about before. We're in a real. The fact that we're still alive is that alone should be a pat on the back. As you had mentioned before, there are a lot of people don't care at all about us. If we didn't exist, I never get to New York. I never get to Philadelphia. I don't go to DC. I'm never going to see theater. I live in Indiana. Maybe the high school put on a show. It was okay. As long as it's, based on a movie that I already know. Right? And the kids were okay, but blah blah. I still prefer to see a classy movie that's put together with, $400 million. And I don't know how we battle that, because we were talking earlier, Darnelle. I thought really good point. It's not that theater tries to go tries to be woke. Let's use a bad political term. It's not trying to be woke. What it is, theater acknowledges that there are multiple levels that people are entertained and educated by. That even when we're not representing real people on stage, even when it's a fantasy, that if you're a child, you can sit there and say, "Oh, that looked great. And that was very funny." That's in each of us, even as an adult. For the parent to say, "Oh, that was witty. That was a funny joke that actually my kids won't get." Right? Yeah. But I get it, and it was kind of over their head, but I'm glad that second level was there. And then there are other people who go, "Wow, that's an intellectually stimulating concept of why humans do what they do, and I wasn't expecting that, and you slid it into my ears when I wasn't thinking about it, and now I thought about it." That's another level. And theater gives you levels. A lot of other things don't. No offense to Marvel. Marvel has very few levels. And that's okay. I'm not against entertainment.
I didn't say that to criticize theater. I'm saying that what it comes down to is marketing, and because that conversation is a worthwhile conversation, of course, but the way we're presenting it to society, it will pull in the people who already understand. It's not going to reach the people who think they don't like theater, even though they watch theater all the time. Like, when they watch theater artists on small and big screens all the time, and so they watch that practice, that training. It's all there, but they just feel like whatever justifies this as a play, even though a TV show is a teleplay, they feel like it's just not for them. And so there's something in that messaging that continues to keep them thinking that. Maybe it's hard to say, we've got this wonderful show, we brought this wonderful team together, and this conversation is relevant because it speaks to, this and that. But then also they get to the theater and it's super glamorous and, it feels out of reach for them. It's not accessible. and there's advertisements about a very high-end gala in the lobby and things like that. And it's like, I don't understand how you keep saying you're for the common man, for, to borrow a phrase. And then you have these events where the common man can't even participate.
Yeah. There are two things that brings to mind. One, every time someone in the theater, rightfully so, says we have a lottery system where you can get a Broadway seat for $29, but you have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning, stand in line in the rain, and hope you're there at the right time. Or we still have $49 tickets, but it's the last row of the balcony. And this is them saying, see, we are accessible. They actually say that.
No.
The part that drives me...
We have limited view seats. Very affordable.
That's
very
right.
affordable limited view seats.
Well, some of them aren't.
No, they're not.
Yeah. And the thing is, all of these benefits, you and I are in the theater. When I get an invitation to a theater company that I adore, that I know everyone working there, and I can't afford to go to their dinner, yeah, I get it. The whole purpose of that benefit is to help pay for their season. I get it. But if you can't include the people who work there to mix in with the people who are going to help fund it, then you again have lost sight. I think we have lost our way. Now, was it different back in the 50s, 60s, 70s? I don't know. It felt different. Maybe because I was lucky enough to work at the New York Shakespeare Festival with Joe Papp. We were all invited to everything. Now, he had lots of money and he was nonprofit. Yeah. But we have lots of nonprofits these days, and I can't go to Manhattan Theater Club. I can't afford to go to Roundabout. I can't, all of these places that have benefits, I'd like to support them. Mm-hmm. Oh, they're charging $500 and up for a dinner? Give me a break. It's just not who the theater goer is. And we're the ones who really support their theater by buying tickets. So
in the words of the incomparable Nell Carter.
Please.
Give me a break. Yes. So even though
you just stated yourself, you know that.
I'm an 80s kid. Yes. Yeah. I remember Give Me a Break and Webster were always on.
So yeah, I know Nell Carter from 8 Misbehaved.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that show. What was I going to say? It was something about, we may have lost our way as a community. Some of us may have lost our way, but we will have to make every effort to find it in future episodes.
There you go.
We are out of time. It took me a while to get there.
Hey,
because yes,
it happens.
It happens, and that's the business of theater. A working title. I'm Darnelle Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And we will see you at the theater.
We sure hope so, if we can afford it.
If we can afford it, those nosebleeds. I got to up this prescription so I can sit in those nosebleeds. Yeah.
All right. See you there, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of The Business of Theater, a working title, with Darnelle Radford and Mitch Weiss. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the podcast with a friend, colleague, or give us some social media love. This podcast is an Emory production. Visit us online at em3ry.com/TBOT. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at em3ryotm.